The year I turned 33, my stepmom stood up at Christmas dinner in a packed house outside Minneapolis and announced that my grandma's lake house officially belonged to my younger brother Chase now, and everybody started clapping like they had just witnessed some sweet family tradition. Except nobody bothered to tell me first, which was kinda strange because Grandma Eleanor had raised me there every summer, and before she passed, she squeezed my hand and whispered, "Someday this place comes back to the one who truly loves it." And for years I thought those words were just sentimental, old lady talk until that Christmas, when my stepmom Karen smiled across the table and said, "Don't worry, sweetheart. You never really had a future here anyway." And the whole room laughed, except my cousin Tyler, whose face turned pale like he knew something everybody else didn't, and buddy, that was the exact moment I stopped feeling hurt and started feeling curious. Because 3 weeks earlier, I had received a certified envelope from a law office in Duluth, containing a document nobody in my family knew existed. And while Karen was passing around pumpkin pie and Chase was bragging about his plans to tear down Grandma's old dock and build luxury rentals, I was sitting there knowing the lake house had never legally belonged to either of them in the first place. See, my father died when I was 10, and Karen married into the family 2 years later. And from that day forward, she acted like every piece of our history belonged to her. She replaced photos. She changed traditions, and she spent 20 years telling everyone Chase would inherit everything, while I was treated like some random guest who happened to share the last name. But a month before Christmas, I met an 82-year-old retired attorney named Walter Benson, who had handled my grandmother's estate. And guess what? The man had been trying to find me for almost a decade, because according to the original deed, my grandmother had placed the lake house into a private family trust and named exactly one beneficiary, me, not Chase, not Karen, me. And the trust was scheduled to transfer ownership on my 33rd birthday, which happened to fall 2 days after Christmas. And dude, when Walter showed me the paperwork, I almost fell out of my chair, because it explained everything. Every weird comment, every family gathering, every time Karen made me feel unwanted. They weren't pushing me away because they hated me. They were pushing me away because they were terrified I might discover what was already mine. And suddenly all those years started making sense. The missing documents, the locked filing cabinet, the excuses. Whenever I asked about Grandma's will, it was all one giant cover story. And Karen had spent 2 decades protecting it. So there, I sat at Christmas dinner, listening to Chase talk about remodeling plans for a house he didn't own, while Karen soaked up attention from relatives who had no clue what was about to happen. Finally, she raised her glass and announced a toast to family legacy, and that's when I stood up, pulled a white envelope from my jacket, and said, "Funny, you should mention legacy, because I brought something too." The room went silent. Karen's smile froze and Chase looked annoyed like I was interrupting his victory speech. I walked over and slid the envelope onto the dining table right next to the ham and said, "Open it, Karen." She laughed and called me dramatic, but I just stood there and waited. Eventually, she grabbed the envelope, pulled out the documents, and started reading. And I swear the color disappeared from her face faster than snow melts in July. Chase leaned over her shoulder, then whispered, "No," way under his breath, and suddenly nobody was laughing anymore. Because there in black and white was the original trust agreement showing Grandma Eleanor had transferred ownership to me years before she died, and the final transfer date was 48 hours away. Karen tried arguing. She tried saying there had to be some mistake, but then my cousin Tyler cleared his throat and admitted Grandma had told him the truth years ago, and made him promise not to interfere unless the paperwork surfaced. And man, you could have heard a pin drop. My stepmom started crying. My brothers started yelling, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't the nervous one at the table. They were. Karen kept shouting about fairness and family and sacrifice, until I finally looked at her and said, "You spent 20 years treating me like an outsider inside my own inheritance, and suddenly you're worried about fairness. That shut her up real quick." Then Chase demanded to know what would happen to his plans, and I told him honestly, "Not my problem, buddy, because you can't sell dreams built on somebody else's property." After that, I did something nobody expected. I didn't scream, I didn't threaten anybody. I simply thanked everyone for dinner, wished them a Merry Christmas, and walked out. 2 days later, the trust officially transferred the lake house into my name. Karen and Chase eventually moved out, and Tyler became the first guest I invited back the following summer, and one evening while sitting on Grandma's old dock watching the sunset over the water, I finally understood what she meant. All those years ago, the house was never the real inheritance. The real inheritance was knowing my worth, before somebody else decided it for me and the people who work hardest to convince you that you don't belong are usually standing in a place that was yours all along.